All right, so the recording is started. And I also want to let you know a little bit of the structure of how we're going to work inside this hour. After we get going and I introduce Irene, she and I are going to chat a little bit about some of the major questions that I put out there on our online around, like, what is ADD? Where does she think it comes from? I think she has some interesting ideas that might be different than some other people's ideas. And why do the symptoms stick so tightly? So we're going to talk about all of that. And then later on, we'll tackle your questions. So I hope everyone has found the Q&A. And I see we have one person who's checked in from Piermont, New Hampshire. Yay. I don't know how to pronounce your name. If it's LaSalle, that's my guess. LaSalle, but you can let me know. And I'd love to see where the rest of you are from. And also, actually, while I'm doing this little admin-y thing here at the beginning, I'd love to know what makes those of you who are here curious about this topic, so that we can make sure to pinpoint some of those pieces as we go. Also, later on, you will have an opportunity to actually ask Irene some questions live. It's why I enjoy Zoom as a, whatever you call it, webinar place to be. And actually, I'm wondering, Debbie, I see you are here. I'm so glad to see you. Debbie, would you mind if I upgraded you to panelist for a quick moment so that I could show everybody how it works to ask a live question? If you could go ahead and just answer in the Q&A, Debbie, if that is okay. And if not, actually, I'll ask, she's saying sure, great. So here I am doing this little click thing, and we're going to see her video and or audio pop up in just a second. There she is. And can we hear you?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah. We can hear you perfectly. So this is a great way to ask questions if you need them later on. And Debbie, can you also turn off your video just so people can see that if they don't want to be seen when they come on, they can see how to do that? Perfect. So if you kind of want to come in anonymously, we are in a recording. So this is a great way to do so. Thanks so much, Debbie. I'm actually going to kick you out now. I have to always remember how to do that here. Here we go. Change role to attendee. There we go. So maybe we'll see you later on if you have some questions. So, all right. Miss Irene Lyon, although her maiden name is here, Irene Gutteridge.
Harder. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you great. Okay. And here, I just want to make sure that they can see your video big now. So I am just so delighted to talk to you today. As you know, but others may not know, I mean, we're colleagues, we are friends. You have been a healer for me. I've worked with you. And we've had this topic that we've been wanting to talk about together for a while and just never, ever had the time to do it. So I'm glad that we get to do it in public and invite some other people to join in with us. So first, though, I mean, I know that you're a nervous system specialist. I also know that you're like a healer, embodied person extraordinaire who is not the usual sort of person to be talking to about ADD and ADHD. And so I'd love for you to give us just kind of the short, like, who are you and why is this topic of interest to you?
Sure. Gosh. Well, I'll give you a quick rundown where I am. I'm in Vancouver, British Columbia, for those of you that don't know me. And my story is pretty long, so I don't want to go into all the details, but my background is in exercise science and in biomedical science, so lots of science stuff. Mm-hmm. And I got into this place where I'm helping people like you and doing interviews like this because I got quite badly injured in my it was my mid-20s, let's just say. And I had a whole series of knee accidents, surgeries, and rehabilitations as a result of a lot of sport. So I was a pretty active teenager, 20-year-old, and even in my early 30s. And I'm still active now, but I don't do the kind of daredevil stuff that I used to do. But because I had a background in exercise training, I thought I knew how to help myself recover and rehab, because that's what I was doing with people in my job. I worked at a rec center with lots of athletes that were getting injured and recovering. But when I had to do my own recovery and work with the physical therapists that were helping me, my system was healed. And I say that kind of like loosely, but my system was kind of broken down. I was still very tight, very sore. I still had a lot of not pain in my knee joints, but just back pain, shoulder pain, neck pain. I was creaky and old, and I was like 25. So someone introduced me to the work of Dr. Moshe Feldenkrais.
Ah.
And that's how I got into the Feldenkrais work. And for those of you that don't know what Feldenkrais is, it's not a cult. A lot of people think it's because it's got that Christ.
Really? People think that?
Yeah. It is a religion, but it isn't a religion. It's a religion. It's a religion of body awareness and learning how to move the body in a way that's aware and intelligent. So I was introduced to this work. It completely, I mean, it's going to sound odd, but I had been struggling with this one specific injury. I actually broke my kneecap in half walking down a flight of stairs after a ACL reconstruction of my left knee joint. So it was like 2 full years being on crutches and in surgeries. And I mean, it was horrible, but it was also what propelled me to realize that I still didn't know how to actually help heal a human system. And I got into the Feldenkrais work actually when I was in Australia doing my master's degree. And within 4 weeks of just devoting my attention to relearning how to move, how to bend my spine without effort, how to feel myself, how to notice when I hold my breath, when I might tense things unnecessarily. Within 4 weeks of going into his teachings, my whole body was as light as a feather. I had no more aches and pains. I was stronger, even though I had let go of all my exercises. And I stopped stretching, even though people think if your muscles are tight, you should stretch them. This is another webinar, but it actually because when you have a muscle that's tight, it isn't just because has nothing to do with the muscle. It has to do with the pattern in the nervous system and how the brain connects to the environment. And then we build up these horrific compensations in our bodies. So that's one chunk. So I was like, oh my God, if I don't study this work, I will be a hypocrite to keep working in the fitness industry, in the rehab industry, without knowing how to do this. So I went into a training to learn how to do this work. It's pretty intensive. It's 4 years, and loved it, started to practice, and then was working with people. They were getting better like I was, but there was a subset of people, like a population of people that weren't getting better, even with this amazing form of, it's really nervous system training, what Feldenkrais is. It's hopefully, I know you know the word, but hopefully if your listeners don't know, there's a term called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity, brain and nervous system's capacity to change and to heal. And the Feldenkrais work is really forefront in that field, and it's being recognized more and more and more as time goes on. There was actually just a very good book called The Brain's Way of Healing, written by a Canadian physician named Norman Doidge, and we'll send out all these links to your people. But he has 2 chapters in his new book on the Feldenkrais work, which just shows you how forward-thinking Dr. Feldenkrais was in the 50s and 60s and 70s. But what he did not know, or he knew but he hadn't figured out yet, was what to do in terms of working with emotions and trauma from a perspective that gets stuck in the system and doesn't escape. So what I was noticing was that the people that I couldn't help, they had had horrible accidents. They had had childhoods that were less than perfect. They had like impact car accidents that were really, really big. One woman, bless her heart, had been in a propane explosion, so she had horrible burns. And even though the burns were healed, there was still this almost like phantom, we call phantom limb pain. It was like phantom skin pain. So I went, oh shoot, I don't know how to work with this population that have had horrible things happen to them. So then, this is the second piece, I got introduced to the work of Dr. Peter Levine. And Dr. Peter Levine, he actually was in Berkeley, where you are, that area, in the 70s, doing his research in biophysics and learning about the stress response and how animals in the wild encounter a pretty stressful situation, they don't develop post-traumatic stress disorder. Whereas humans in the wild, we have an accident that's not that traumatic. It's not like a cheetah is chasing us. But we then go into these horrific syndromes and symptoms that we now call PTSD, anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, horrible things like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, chronic pain, irritable bowel, migraine headaches, all these things that the normal medical world can't really figure out. So what Peter realized was that when we have a threat that's pretty big, accident, we are threatened by our parents, even if they don't intend to do it, but we feel unsafe in their presence, our little system, not just our brain, but our nervous system, which is like the superhighway in our body that connects things, it goes on alert. And so I went, oh my goodness, I have to study this now. So then I did another training. And then what I realized was, wow, together the work of these two brilliant men, they're really what we call them neuroplasticians, like technicians, but technicians of the nervous system. Together, it just is such a beautiful connection. So that's how I got into the work.
So, and I think I'm starting to understand as I hear your story that you would say, and tell me if this is correct, that ADD and ADHD are not just problems of the focus. They're not just problems of the brain's ability to focus, but they're actually an embodied condition.
Thing. Let's call it a thing.
An embodied thing.
Embodied thing. So if we go one step back, what we often forget is that the brain in here, so everyone watching, you can like touch your head, like inside of there is an organ.
Yeah.
Organ. We forget that the brain is an organ, but it is. And there's different pieces to it. Just like our digestive system has the stomach and the intestines and the rectum and all that. But it's still an end organ. So in other words, it is influenced by our environment. And it's influenced by what happens to us and how we are brought up, the language we listen to, the temperature that we're born into, and then all the set points inside of the brain. And, I'm not going to get into all that because it's way too much. They will learn and they will form pathways based on what we have coming at us, whether it's good stuff or not so good stuff. And I think what happens is the professionals, bless their hearts, they look at it's something like attention deficit disorder and then go, oh, well, because it has to do with processing and thinking and attention, that it has to do with the part of the body that is responsible for that. But attached to this end organ is this whole other body system that influences this. And I mean, to go off on a slight tangent, but it really isn't, one of the things that is becoming more and more known is that there's a certain nerve that we have in our body called the vagus nerve.
I was just going to say, I've been your student, so let me try and guess. And I was going to say vagus nerve.
Yeah, there's something called the vagus nerve, and it originates in the brain, comes out of the brain stem. It's a cranial nerve, but it goes to like our entire viscera and core, and more of the pathways go from the gut to the brain. So it's actually, even though it's so funny, and I have a sense that we're going to learn more about this nerve. We don't even know half of this, a quarter or an eighth. We know so little about how these connections work. But what we are finding in some research is that they're finding that the origins of seizures, Parkinson's, are starting in the vagus nerve in the gut.
Wow.
And then it's sending messages to the brain, and then that's where this end organ goes crazy. So what we have to realize is that we are the brain, we're the body, but without the connection to the environment, we're nothing.
And am I remembering correctly from our work together that the vagus nerve, when we're babies and we're born, the vagus nerve isn't fully there yet, and it grows in accordance with the vagus nerves of the people who are rearing us?
You got it. This is something that can be rather depressing and hopeful. So I'll start with the hopeful side. The beauty of the nervous system and the brain, I kind of put them together, is, like I said, they have the capacity to change. So that's the first thing to really understand, is that when there is something not working, there is a capacity to switch it. Of course, someone would say, yeah, well, if someone cuts off your arm, you can't grow that back. It's like, well, some people would argue with that, but there are certain things in the body that are irreversible.
Right.
But then there are many things that can be reversed. So when we are born, so when we're a little baby, we have the capacity, we don't have a lot of capacities, right? We're basically our fight, flight, and freeze mechanism. So I got to go back a little bit here. And this is where the nervous system comes into play. So for those of you that know nothing about the nervous system, I'll make it really simple. So there's one nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. And it basically governs our digestion, our sleep-wake cycles, our urine production, our sexual organs, our hormone release. It just works, right? We don't have to think about our digestion happening. So that's one part that our nervous system governs. The second part is our survival instincts. So our fight, flight, freeze responses. So that's a tiger's chasing me, my adrenaline gets pumped up, I gotta run.
Right.
Most of us understand that example. But there's a part of our survival instincts that rarely gets talked about, and that's the third F. So there's fight, flight, and then there's
freeze.
Freeze. And freeze is what we are really good at when we're babies. We're really good at startling and then shutting down when there's a threat. And a bit of that is okay. But when it happens too much due to circumstances that are stressful, the system starts to favor going into that freeze response. It starts to go into that stress response really easily. It's like the groove, like a path, walking through the bush, it just gets broken down. The part of the nervous system that isn't online when we're born, which you were just talking about, is part of the vagus nerve system. It's part of this autonomic nervous system, and it's the part that allows us to socially engage. So right now, I'm watching your face. You're looking kind of interested. It's hard because I see the participants, the numbers, and I'm like, I have no idea if they're interested.
You guys can say in the Q&A.
Yeah, but so it's hard. It's kind of, this is weird with online, but I have you to look at. So it's keeping me alert, and we're bouncing back from one another. When a baby is born, so I'm going to go back. their vagus nerve has two parts. One is responsible for the freeze, the slowing down, the shutdown. The other part is responsible for interaction.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's so important to have attunement. So a mother that looks and talks and coos and smiles and mimics in many ways the baby's facial expressions. And it's like a two-way street. So that baby is going to see mama. So if I was baby, I'm seeing Mama Gretchen, and she's looking at me interested, and I'm like, oh, there she is. And if you smile at me, smile, I'm going to go, oh, right? So you, if you're my mom and you're smiling at me, I am going to feel that feedback, and that's going to start to grow the vagus nerve connections that aren't built when we're born.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is that when those connections get built in a good way, when we have safety and love and connection and empathy, and we're not always going off into that shutdown response,
Mm-hmm.
we build up the capacity to calm ourselves down. So that part of the vagus nerve actually goes to our heart, like a part of the heart that slows the heart down.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, it calms us down in a good way. Whereas the freeze component of the vagus nerve shuts us down fast. It's the blank stare. I'm not here, look.
Which as a teacher, I saw all the time in the classroom. I just have to say, I mean, I think most of our students are probably, ADD or not, are in freeze mode when they're in school.
In some ways, because they're not moving. And so this comes, then we come back to the body. And it is possible to sit and be attentive and not move a lot, but it's whether or not that person is disconnecting from their body, or are they feeling their body while sitting.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there's so many snippets here,
Yeah.
but to wrap up that into a little piece, the vagus nerve is a very important nerve because it is responsible for allowing us to calm down and cool down in a way that's engaging, but it also can shut us down.
Mm-hmm.
And it depends on how our early life was. And I mean, I could go into a gazillion examples of how that nerve gets damaged based on circumstance and the environment. So maybe we'll do that in a second. But the key to know is that that nerve isn't just in the brain. So this comes back to your question about the brain.
Right.
It connects to the heart, the lungs, the facial muscles, the gut, everything. What do kindergarten students say when they hate their teacher? My tummy's sore. Right? Or if they don't feel safe, it's like when I was in grade 1, my teacher was horrific.
Yeah.
I was in the nurse's station every day with a horrible tummy ache, and they thought I had an ulcer. And I didn't. I was just frightened of our teacher.
Right.
So that was that vagus nerve. That was my survival energies going, I don't like this. And I was shutting down. And so I was going too far into a dissociated state. And then my body was talking to me. And then you get cranky, you get anxious.
Right. So with all of this sort of background, how would you then define things, conditions, deals, whatever, like ADD and ADHD? What do you think is happening in the system, in the nervous system, when people are having attentional problems?
There's definitely a disconnect between the body. There is a dissociation. So it's kind of simple in a way. To me, when there's these labels, it's a spectrum. Because the kid that's also often ADD also there's also a hyperactivity sometimes.
Right.
And the best way to describe it, at least from my perspective, is that the nervous system, their internal wiring is in chaos. And it also is either in hyper mode, on, or shut down mode, off. So that's that blank stare. So when kids are in like the staring out the window looking like they're asleep, their brain is actually in the wave patterns of a person sleeping. And then when they're in the high, you can't calm them down, we could say it's almost like being in a manic state. But to me, it's just arousal. There's too much fight and flee energy going.
Right.
And then I ask the question, well, what's making it such that this little person or this big person, it can be both, adults also have it, what is making it such that those people, that person is feeling unsafe and is having to shut down or be on hyper alert mode? So it seems like I'm really simplifying it, but when our nervous system is unsafe, when there is a sense of something isn't safe or I don't like it here, it's going to do its best to protect itself and kind of drop into a zone that it can be in, such that it doesn't have to feel as much the body. And then that's where the disconnect comes from the body.
Yeah, I'm thinking about a speaker who I saw within the last year on the topic of ADD, and this was a college professor, researcher, I forget who in this moment, had written a book and has done the research about when cases, like looking at doctors and how through time, how many cases of diagnosed ADD there is. And of course, all the diagnoses just, is pretty much none at all, right? And then they shot up right around the time when our schooling system became much more sit, read, listen, much more still, much more anti body.
Yeah.
And so certainly, it's easy to say, well, ADD comes from that. But I hear you saying that it also could go back further into childhood. So like, how do we understand, because of course, helping a student learn in ways that work with their attentional capacities is a great, I do that as a coach all the time, figuring out how to help my clients focus. But it sounds like you're suggesting that those are in some ways surface level strategies to help people cope, but it doesn't actually get to the underlying trauma inside the nervous system.
Yeah, you got it bang on. And it's multifactorial. That's the thing too. There's so many factors. You could have a child that has very safe home life, right? Completely safe, food's on the table, loving parents, they're there, no one's divorced. It's like, but they may have had a tonsillectomy or an early hospitalization.
Yeah.
Terrified the heck out of that little kid. And their system is looking for the escape. And that was actually how Peter Levine discovered his work by accident. He was working with a woman who was in her 20s under a ton of stress doing her PhD, funnily enough. And she was, chronic migraines, digestion, depression, anxiety, all these body syndromes. Her body was breaking down. And as he started to work with her and get her to sense her body, they somehow came across an early surgery that she had, which was having her tonsils taken out. This would have been, in the late 40s when she was a little girl. And they put ether over her face, which is how they did it back then. They masked you, and it terrified her. And she tried to break free. And what do you do? What do they do when you try to break free in an operating room? They pin you down.
Right.
And that pinning down is not allowing that little person's nervous system to feel the triumph of escaping that attack.
Mm.
So they are rendered helpless.
Mm.
And I've come across quite a few parents who don't know what to do with these children or this child that has all the classic signs and symptoms of these kids, but they have everything is perfect, right? But they've had a birth trauma or a hospitalization or something that scared them.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't, there's so many factors. Diet is another one, food that's clean. That's another big important element in terms of making sure that the nervous system and the brain are functioning properly.
One of the, I sent out an email earlier today asking for questions from folks, and somebody emailed asking me, there's a new book that everyone's talking about right now that has grain in the title. I forget the name of it. But she said that there's a whole section in that book. And actually, if any of you listening know what I'm talking about, if you could put it in the little Q&A box. But she said there was a whole section on it about the effects, some new research that's that about the effects of grain and attentional diagnoses like ADD.
You see, the thing that I mean, this is where then here's my opinion is coming out. The trouble with just saying it's grain or it's gluten or it's sugar
Mm-hmm.
is also, I don't know. It's in a way irresponsible because you'll go to cultures where all they eat is grain,
Uh-huh.
where all they, rice is their main diet, or there is sugar, but it's all the other pieces that go into this, what one researcher and medical doctor is calling our toxic culture.
Mm-hmm.
There's the food, there's lack of exercise, there's the parents that are strapped because to make money these days takes, we need more. So we're always working. There's so many factors. And I read a piece of research a while back that I think it was the obesity rate went up when the divorce rate went up.
Mm.
So when children were starting to experience being in more broken homes, that is a stress.
Mm-hmm.
Stress, even if it was an amicable split between the parents, that little person is still going to see a family system breaking up, and it puts them into that vagus nerve state that's freeze. It slows the metabolism down. So that little person goes into sort of a protection, and then they build up the layers of fat because they're trying to protect themselves. So I've seen that research. So there's all these different things. So I think it becomes very individual.
Right.
Tough for some people. They just want us the solution. It's like, okay, well, we'll just cut out all grain and sugar. And it's like, well, what if that doesn't work? Right?
Right. Like we'll cut out all grain and sugar, or we'll work with an academic coach, or can you actually speak to medication for a moment? Because obviously, and I actually, frankly, I just want to be honest to say that, I mean, I have seen with so many of my clients, medication actually does help them focus and really does help them feel better in their skins, even though there's always a thing or two that they don't like, but it's always enough that I am finding myself recommending more and more to families that they look into it just because it seems to bring such relief to students. But I feel a little bad doing that because I know we're a culture that's really dependent on medications. And so can you speak to that a little bit?
I'll speak a little bit. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist or a doctor, right? So this is more from what I've heard and what I've researched and seen with my own eyes. But medications can work as long as it's short term. But what happens often is then they become a crutch. They become a Band-Aid. And if there isn't an investigation into a deeper root cause, then we get into trouble, because then we're not really looking. It's like, well, what's happening? Why does this child not feel safe?
Right.
It really, a lot of it comes down to that. Why are they feeling like they have to shut down or attack? And actually, I did a little bit of homework One book that I highly recommend, I know you know the author Gabor Mate. His book, Scattered Minds, is a great read for anyone listening to this who want a bit more of the research. I actually have it here. Let's see if this turns. This is my copy, but it's...
Oh, nice.
So it's a new look at the origins and healing of attention deficit disorder. Gabor Mate is a Vancouver-based physician, and he deals with a lot of addiction, chronic health as a result of stress, and he also specializes in ADD because he himself has it as an adult. But I was watching another thing of his, kind of a TED Talk, but it was at Bioneers, which is an environmental conference. And this is what he says, I'm quoting him. "What we have here is the massive experiment in the chemical control of children's brains without knowing the long-term effects." So I do agree it can be helpful, but you also have to look at the other elements. I know a little guy that was medicated because of being diagnosed by ADD, and what they were missing was his childhood trauma. They were missing the fact that his dad had been deployed to Afghanistan twice when he was born. And there was that trauma of fear that the mother was feeling. And I could tell something was different, because then I saw him after they medicated him, and he was a kid that would come up to me and engage with his vagus nerve. Irene, and show me all his books. I walked into the house and he just sat there reading his book. He didn't even pick up to that. So he was being good because he could be attentive, but he had lost his spark. So that's what we have to be careful with these medications is, yes, it might make your kid be better, so you don't have to handle them as much, but at what cost is it also damaging other circuitries within their system? And then that's where you need a multidisciplinary approach to make sure that you are engaging with them, that you're keeping that part of their brain developing, because at the age of 7 or 8 or 10, the brain is still developing. We're still developing.
Well, and even at 16, 17, when most of my clients start.
It's still happening. So, so that's kind of that's the thing. I work with a lot of people that come in and they've been on antidepressants and anti-anxiety meds.
A lot of my clients have that too. They either have just that, or they have just the ADD, or sometimes there's both.
Exactly. And typically there's both. My fear is that a lot of the kids being put on these meds, when they become adults, they are going to need another form of a chemical to balance the system, unless they've been brought into a holistic team that is teaching them mindfulness, body practices. A lot of the research with kind of the forefront people in the trauma world, they are starting to finally, thank God, talk about the value of drumming and singing and dancing and chanting, because all that stimulates that vagus nerve.
Right.
It stimulates the body, it gets the natural flow back into the system. And there's a reason why the Eastern cultures have been doing this stuff for centuries. And we've become, I mean, it's a North American thing. Canada does this too, and Europe and Australia, but we really like there's a problem, let's find the solution to fix it.
Right.
And it's really gotten us into trouble.
Yeah. So I am noticing the time, and I'm wanting to make sure if any of the folks who are either they're calling in or here have questions, I want to make sure that I save time. If you don't, I have plenty of my own to ask Irene. But if there is a topic that you are hoping we might cover, or if there is something, like if you're a parent or a teacher and you have some specific questions about how to, because I know we've been talking kind of generally here, And if you want to know more specifically what to do in a specific situation that you're in, please go ahead and put that into the Q&A so that I know to call on you. You don't have to show up and ask live unless you want to. So just indicate that in the Q&A. I know phone call listeners, I realize actually that I don't think you have access to the Q&A. So realize that's a downside of Zoom. I'm going to have to look into that. You can't raise your hand, I don't think. So I will, but I encourage you to email me afterwards, Gretchen@GretchenWegner.com, if you have specific questions, and I'll forward them to Irene. But so the question that that I named this whole workshop is it possible to completely cure ADD? And so will you just take that on for a little bit? Like, can we get rid of it?
Well, I would then is it an actual specific problem, like an infection? You get an infection, you take an antibiotic. To me, this is more of a spectrum related problem, and it's important to look at, first of all, the individuality. So as a person that works with this, I would say yes. If we want to say yes, can we cure it? Of course we can. And then it depends on the willingness of the family to work at it as a whole. Oh. And the reason I say that is I've had I do work with kids, teenagers, and what breaks my heart is that the parents ship them off to me because they have issues, digestive issues, pain issues. But if the system at home is still kind of broken, and when I say broken, I don't mean like horrific abuse and neglect. I mean that the parents haven't looked at their own past traumas and their own ways in which they stay in fight, flight, and freeze. That's the part that is very important to address. So, we're putting a lot of pointing of fingers that, what's wrong with my child? Right. Why are they not listening to me? Why can't they focus? It's kind of like ease up on that. And it isn't also about blaming the parents. It's about looking at the whole system and what's going on. And it can be very, very tough for a parent to have to also look at their own stuff and do their own work. And so to kind of go back to that question, it's like, what has to happen? It has to be looked at from many different perspectives, and I'm not blanking out here. I'm just kind of, the reason why I'm kind of like, is it simple? And it also isn't. It's a very simple thing. It's like, well, safety, how do we help that? And a lot of times with safety, it's like, where, for the parents, do they not feel safe? And that then goes into another kind of whole other situation. It's like, well, safety is more than just saying out loud, I am safe. Right. It's at a cellular level. So I've totally forgotten what your question was.
Is it possible to cure?
Right. Yes. I believe it is. I believe everyone has the capacity to heal to some degree or to a lot, right? Like there's a thing that happens when people work with me. If they come in and they don't want to get better, chances are they won't. So there's a very big element to this that brings in mindset and the possibility that something can change. So a cure, I think, can happen, if we want to use that word, when the whole family system, especially the parents, see that little person or that teenager as an entity that can heal. And then also looking at, being able to look at, why is this going off in the first place? And actually working with a professional that can ask the questions, like what happened at birth. I mean, one of the reason I bring up Gabor Mate I'm not someone that has ADD. I never did. I never have. Dyslexia, yes. Right? Those sorts of things. Sure. But I was never labeled. I had horrific grades as a kid, like C minuses across the board. They thought there was something wrong with me. I had my hearing tested and everything. And the beauty, I bless my parents' hearts for this, they never made an issue out of it. They never were like, this is a problem that we have to get fixed. They just let me go along. And it was because my dad had trouble in school. So he wasn't going to scold me or shame me or guilt me into getting better grades. And eventually I got out of it because I had that support, but I was never poked and prodded. And what I see a lot of in terms of the cures, people not being able to move forward, is that the family system puts too much pressure on that little developing brain. Like the amount of pressure, I mean, you would get it, the amount of pressure that kids have, it's stupendous. And they're going into a survival response in their learning environments.
Right.
And when that happens, so this is a piece that I can't remember, I haven't said till now, when we're in a survival response, so when we feel under threat, when we're in the hyper or the hypo, our neocortex goes offline.
Right.
Which I know you know.
Right.
And the reason it goes offline is because of that damn vagus nerve. Right? It's turned on in the wrong way. So we have to turn it on in the right way. And putting more pressure isn't going to help that, nor is sitting more and trying to focus. That's where, if we give it a remedy, drumming, movement, that's why movement can influence the capacity to think, which is, I know you're big with that. Music stimulates that vagus nerve, types of music. Soft voices stimulate that type, not the big, scary papa voice, right? That shuts a person down. So there's all these little elements that need to be looked at in terms of curing it.
Yeah, so those of us who are like me, who are like coaches, so I guess I'm just going to ask the question right now, like, are we doing any good? Am I doing any good by helping students cope with their symptoms of distraction and learning how to study better? And I mean, what would you say to that?
I think we have to. I think we have to, in the same way that I'm having a cup of coffee right now. Right? I'm not perfect. I was up too late, so I have some coping strategies. We all do, right? Because we've created a culture that doesn't allow our systems to de-stress properly, there are certain strategies we've developed. Those that do it really well, like yourself, because you're such a great coach, I think it's valuable, because then you get amazing tools that a person can pull out of their pocket when they need to. And then it's important to go into this deeper layer when there's time, and in a way that is smart and sophisticated and suits the person. To force a child to meditate, this has become a big thing. It's like, meditation for kids and all this, and getting them to sit still. A child that has ADD, the last thing you want to do is force them to try to do mindfulness training. No. Give him a drum, give him a skipping rope. There's a lot of, one of my good colleagues actually just is doing a $500,000 grant he got to study ADHD and Tai Chi in kids.
Yeah.
And the reason why Tai Chi, just like yoga and Feldenkrais, is good is because you're putting attention onto movement into the body, as opposed to just trying to focus on a blank page.
Right.
And so when you can put attention onto movement, you're bringing the entire system online, so then a person is able to put focus into the rest of their body, and then that helps settle them and soothe them. So yes, strategies are important. We need them. We totally need them. And then there's this other layer that's important. And the mindfulness world has totally exploded. Everyone knows what yoga is. Everybody knows what meditation is. But to me, it's like, well, let's talk about why those are good. Like, what is it actually doing to help? Or do we need to prescribe a different kind of therapeutic outlet for this person to become more focused onto their body?
Mm-hmm. No, I have an adult friend with ADHD, and she is recently diagnosed, and she and I talk a lot because of the work that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And she was talking about how, yeah, I really should do yoga. And I said to her, I'm not sure that yoga is a good thing for you, because you get into poses and you hold them. It's very still, it's very quiet. And I actually suggested to her, like, why not Tai Chi or Qigong or some other kind of movement modality where you're just in constant movement, but you're focusing on the movement, because there are other things you can do where there's less focus involved, and it seems that's what you're saying, is to learn how to connect the two, the focus to your body.
You got it. That's the magic with those practices. That's the same reason why exercise is super important. Running, biking, hiking, going to the gym, but it fails to cure these attention problems because it's not bringing focus onto the body in the same way. So there's something that happens when you slow a movement down, and you notice when you sense the movement and correct the movement while you're moving, if that makes sense. So as I do a movement in Tai Chi or in Feldenkrais, I am feeling the lightness of my hand and making it soft. And I'm noticing, oh, it's rigid. And then I'm literally giving myself self-biofeedback. And I know we've done some of this stuff together where it's like, oh, I have to soften my hand and then notice how that affects my breath. It's like, oh, and now I feel more settled. Right. So there is a thing. It's biochemical, it's neurological when you attend to movement in a slow, aware way and you pause.
Well, and I found myself, so I was just at this 4-day retreat where there's learning retreat where there's a lot of sitting and a lot of listening. And I noticed two things. I tend to have migraines, as you know, because that's what we've worked on. And so I either stood and let myself sway very smoothly and let my head move, or there were times that, because we talked about the bell hand, was something Irene has taught me. And so I would sit there while I'm trying to attend to what I'm learning and just very slowly open and close my hand, and seeing if I can sort of both attend to my hand and attend to the learning. And it did kind of help, because I don't have actual ADD, but I really have symptoms like people with ADD when I have to sit for long periods of time, and that helped me.
Yeah. And that, I mean, anyone watching can try that. It's a classic gold standard of the Feldenkrais work called the bell hand. And it's not about opening and closing the hand fast. It's about making it, I call it like seaweed in the ocean. It's like, how can it be soft? And how can you feel and change the tone of the musculature to make it soft and easy and effortless? And by attending to a movement and then changing it to make it more efficient and easy, you can't help but soften your breath.
Right.
I mean, just now I can, your breath was changing.
Yeah.
So it's so difficult sometimes because some of this stuff is so bloody simple, right? One of the things that I know we worked with in another little tool is to learn how to orient, which is simply, so if you're watching this, to actually take your eyes off of the computer and look around slowly and see and move the head, use your eyes, listen to sounds that might be happening. And even as I do that right now, I just took a bigger spontaneous breath.
Yeah.
Because I've been kind of on, right? Because we're doing this presentation, but I'm also constantly every now and again looking away and regulating my system a little bit. And by allowing the attention to actually break focus, it helps to reset that nervous system that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that kids want to do because they'll get distracted. It's like, well, is it a distraction, or are they just trying to like reset a little bit? What if we allowed them to kind of lull away and come back?
Right.
Or to get up and move a little bit and then come back.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm noticing we have 4 minutes left until our end time. And I would love it if those of you who are on the call, this is new for me. Like, this is the first time I've been having this level of a conversation around the nervous system and these topics. And I would love to hear from you if you're open to, of course, no requirement, but it would be just so helpful for me in my own moving forward with my business, what your big takeaways are from this conversation, so that I have some clues about where to go next, like what's interesting to people and where to go next. And I'm also realizing, Irene, I would love it if you're open to it. You don't have to answer here if there's pressure. But inside my anti-boring approach to powerful studying, I have this test anxiety unit, which really is just academic anxiety. And it seems to me that even just a small 3-minute video about the bell hand, because that's something kids can do under their desk, so no one has to see.
Yeah, oh, I like that.
And a small video about orienting could be super, super helpful to add to that as really concrete, like things that kids can learn and do when they're feeling like they're having trouble attending.
Yeah. And actually, to add a piece on that, what was it that you called anxiety? I
said test anxiety or academic anxiety.
Right. So one little tidbit for those watching, whether you're a coach or a parent, is that, again, I like to get away from these labels of anxiety. 9 times out of 10, actually no, 10 times out of 10, when you ask a person to notice what anxiety is, it's purely a sensation in the body. It's a tightness in the chest, it's a constriction in the throat, in the belly, tightness in the hands, and to counteract that, the antidote to such anxiety, such sensations, is to go into the body and to feel it, to notice it. And we've become so afraid in our culture of feeling anything uncomfortable. And then what happens is when we disallow that ability to feel it, it just builds and it builds and it builds. And as it builds in the system, the stress response gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then, of course, we can't concentrate because we're dealing with all this, I call it junk, that's stewing inside. And then we need to do something to release it. And often, if we can get it when it comes in and learn to listen to the body when it comes in and to release it naturally, the system doesn't fill up with that stress. Yeah.
Cool.
But I like your idea. That's great. We'll do that.
We'll do it. Good. Good. And so I also know that you have this, is it a free ebook that talks about the 7 steps to de-stressing? Will you say a little bit about that in case people want to understand how they can go more deeply in your work?
Yep. So I have, it's a free training. There's an ebook. It's like a mini ebook. It talks a bit more about stress physiology. It's really simple, but still give you a good overview. There's an exercise. I call it 7 steps to de-stress. It's simple and it works. The people that have done it, they're like, this works. And then with that, there's a video of me talking the ebook out. So if you don't like to read, you can listen. There's a blueprint that has all the steps in sort of Cole's Note fashion. And then there's also, we just added this, an audio of me talking you through it as if it's a guided meditation to notice.
Oh, good.
So it's like a 10-minute audio exercise.
Oh, I'm going to go get that for myself then, because I love having your audios on my my iPhone to listen to. Great.
So that's, if you're, my site, you can get that, irenelyon.com.
That's IRENE.
IRENELYON. And the website's pretty comprehensive to all sorts of people, but you just download it, and if you'll get it and have a bunch of goodies to read.
Awesome.
Mhm.
Well, I'm so glad that we took the time to have this conversation in public.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that there are a number of folks on the call right now. And really, seriously, it looks like folks didn't want to do it in the Q&A, but if you'd like to do it privately, there's Gretchen at GretchenWegner.com. I guess the technology gods are telling us to end.
You're going into the water.
So I'm going to say goodbye and end our call, but please do send me emails, folks, if there is anything that you're taking away, or even if you were like, oh, that was like, oh, I don't buy it. You know, if you have that response too, I really would love to hear where folks are with this material.
Yep.
So thank you so much, Irene. And
you're welcome. Bye, guys.
take care, everyone.
Bye.